Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Iskon Guruvanda Ki, Shri Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Is there anything on the Vaishnav calendar that we need to read from today? That's okay. Oh, thanks. So first of all, we'll read a little from Srila Prabhupada. He built a house in which the whole world can live. And we are still on the introduction. Bhaktivedanta Swami returned to Delhi, pursuing the usual avenues of book selling, looking for whatever opportunity might arise. One day, to his surprise, he was contacted by the Ministry of External Affairs and informed that his no objection certificate for travelling to the US was ready. Since he had not instigated any proceedings for leaving the country, he had to inquire from the Ministry declaration form signed by Mr. Gopal Agarwal of Butler, Pennsylvania. Mr. Agarwal solemnly declared that he would bear the expenses of Bhaktivedanta Swami during his stay in the US. Now Bhaktivedanta Swami had a sponsor, but he still needed a passport, visa, P form, and travel fare. The passport was simple. Now with passport and sponsorship papers, Bhaktivedanta Swami went to Bombay, not to sell books or raise funds for printing, but to seek assistance in getting to America. He approached Sumati Morarji, the head of the Scindia steamship line, who had helped him with a large donation for printing Volume 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam. He showed his sponsorship papers to her secretary, Mr. Chokshi, who was impressed and went to Mrs. Morarji on his behalf. The Swami from Vrindavan is back, he told her. He has published his book on your donation. He has a sponsor and he wants to go to America. He wants you to send him on a Scindia ship. Mrs. Morarji said no. The Swami was too old to go to the United States and expect to accomplish anything. Mr. Chokshi conveyed to him Mrs. Morarji's words, but Bhaktivedanta Swami listened disapprovingly. She wanted him to stay in India and complete Srimad Bhagavatam. Why go to the States? She had argued. Finish the job here. But Bhaktivedanta Swami was fixed on going. He told Mr. Chokshi to convince Mrs. Morarji and even coached him on what to say. So this is what he said. I find this gentleman very inspired to go to the States and preach Lord Krishna's message to the people there. But when Mr. Chokshi told Mrs. Morarji again, she said no. The Swami was not healthy. Besides, people in America were not so cooperative, and they would probably not listen to him. Exasperated with Mr. Choksi's ineffectiveness, Bhaktivedanta Swami demanded a personal interview. It was granted, and a grey-haired but determined Bhaktivedanta Swami presented his emphatic request. Please give me one ticket. Srimati Maharaji was concerned. Swamiji, you're so old. You're taking this responsibility. Do you think it is all right? No, he assured her, lifting his hand as if to reassure a doubting daughter. It is all right. But do you know what my secretaries think? They say Swamiji is going to die there. Bhaktivedanta Swami made a face as if to dismiss a foolish rumour. Just see communication without even saying anything. Again, he insisted that she give him a ticket. All right, she said, get your P form and I will make an arrangement to send you by our ship. Bhaktivedanta Swami smiled brilliantly and happily left her offices past her amazed and sceptical clerics. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1, entitled The History of the Life of a Jamil, text number 50. Panchabi Kurute Swartan. Panchabi Kurute Swartan. Pancha Vedata Panchabi. Panchavedata Panchabi. Ekas Tu Shodashena Trin. Ekas Tu Shodashena Trin. Swayam Saptadasho Ashnute. Swayam Saptadasho Shnute. Panchabi Kurute Swartan. Panchavedata Panchabi. Ekastu Sodashena Trin. Swayam Saptadasho Shnute. Panchabi Kurite Swartan. Panchavedata Panchabi. Ekastu Shodashena Trin. Swayam Saptadasho Shnute. Panchabi Kurite Swartan. Panchavedata Panchabi. Ekastu Shodashena Trin. Swayam Saptadasho Shnute. Please chant. Panchabi Kurite Swartan. Mataji. Panchabi. With the 5 working senses: voice, arms, legs, penis and genitals. Kurute performs. Swaartan, his desired interests. Pancha, the 5 objects of the senses: sound, form, touch, aroma and taste. Veda, nose. Ata, thus. Panchabi, by the 5 working senses. By the 5 senses of perception: hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. Eka, the 1, 2, but Shodashena, by these 15 items and the mind. Train, the 3 categories of experience: happiness, distress, and a mixture of both. Swayam, he, the living entity himself. Saptadasha, the 17th item, Ashnute, so enjoys. Translation: above the 5 senses of perception, the 5 working senses, and the 5 objects of the senses is the mind, which is the 16th element. Above the mind is the 17th element, the soul, the living being himself, who, in cooperation with the other 16, enjoys the material world alone. The living being enjoys 3 kinds of situations, namely happy, distressful, and mixed. Please repeat. Above the 5 senses of perception, the 5 working senses, and the 5 objects of the senses is the mind, which is the 16th element. Above the mind is the 17th element, the soul, the living being himself, who, in cooperation with the other 16, enjoys the material world alone. The living being enjoys 3 kinds of situations, namely happy, distressful, and mixed. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Everyone engages in work with his hands, legs, and other senses just to achieve a certain goal according to his concocted ideas. One tries to enjoy the 5 sense objects, namely form, sound, taste, aroma, and touch, not knowing the actual goal of life, which is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Because of disobeying the Supreme Lord, one is put into material conditions, and he then tries to improve his situation in a concocted way, not desiring to follow the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nevertheless, the Supreme Lord is so kind that he comes himself to instruct the bewildered living entity how to act obediently, and then gradually return home back to Godhead, where he can attain an eternal, peaceful life of bliss and knowledge. The living entity has a body which is a very complicated combination of the material elements, and with this body he struggles alone, as indicated in this verse by the words Ekas 2. For example, if one is struggling in the ocean, he must swim through it alone. Although many other men and aquatics are swimming in the ocean, he must take care of himself because no one else will help him. Therefore, this verse indicates that the 17th item, the soul, must work alone. Although he tries to create society, friendship, and love, no one will be able to help him but Krishna, the Supreme Lord. Therefore, his only concern should be how to satisfy Krishna. That is also what Krishna wants. Sarvadar mam parityaja mam ikam sharanam vraja. People bewildered by material conditions try to be united, but although they strive for unity among men and nations, all their attempts are futile. Everyone must struggle alone for existence with the many elements of nature. Therefore, one's only hope, as Krishna advises, is to surrender to him, for he can help one become free from the ocean of nescience. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore prayed, Ayananda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Budo Kripaya Tavapada Pankaja Stita Duli Sadrasham Vichintaya. O Krishna, beloved son of Nanda Maharaj, I am your eternal servant, but somehow or other I have fallen into this ocean of nescience, and although I'm struggling very hard, there's no way I can save myself. You kindly pick me up and fix me as one of the particles of dust at your lotus feet. That will save me. In a similar way, Bhaktivinoda Thakur sang, Anadi karma phale padibavar navajale taribari na deki upai. My dear Lord, I cannot remember when I somehow or other fell into this ocean of nescience, and now I can find no way to rescue myself. We should remember that everyone is responsible for his own life. If an individual becomes a pure devotee of Krishna, he is then delivered from the ocean of nescience. Om Agana Timarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshunmalitam Yana Tasma Shigurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Garam Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shigaram Unitaranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Above the five senses of perception, the five working senses, and the five objects of the senses is the mind, which is the 16th element. Above the mind is the 17th element, the soul, the living being himself, who in cooperation with the other 16 enjoys the material world alone. The living being enjoys three kinds of situations, namely happy, distressful, and mixed. So it's quite an amazing purport here. One thing which Prabhupada mentions a couple of times here is about concocting. So it seems popular nowadays to have some kind of concocted idea as to how we're going to advance in spiritual life. Here Prabhupada says that the Supreme Lord himself comes from time to time to re-establish the principles of Dharma. But people, they prefer out of pride or sometimes out of bad experience with some other kind of materially motivated religious process, then they're not so keen to follow a line of authority. And therefore they become more inclined towards, what is it you call it? Pip and I were just talking about it. You take a little from this and a little from that. Eclectic. Eclectic is quite fashionable nowadays. But here, Prabhupada says, is in the material world, you're on your own. And when you're enjoying your senses, you're on your own. You may say we have a party. Somebody may be really enjoying, somebody may be really miserable. And it appears on the face of that everybody's got equal opportunity to enjoy. But someone's karma may be that they split up with their girlfriend or boyfriend, or that whatever they took doesn't agree with them, or something else is going on. So we're all going through our own individual experiences, our own individual journey. And simply to concoct a way out of it, because we're accustomed to struggling in this material world, trying to find a way to survive, then sometimes we try to take shelter, as Prabhupada says here, in friendship, love, and society. This is likened to taking shelter of the tail of the dog. So if you're swimming in the ocean, as Prabhupada was talking about here, everyone's taking care of themselves in the ocean. Now, if you're struggling to swim, but you see a dog swimming and it looks like it's managing to swim very easily, then you grab onto the tail of that dog, then you're going to start bringing it down, so it'll turn around and bite you. So this is the nature of trying to take shelter in the material world, that we think, I can get some shelter in this type of connection with the sense and the sense object, or this type of society, friendship or love. We will find shelter in this group, this national idea, this type of social group, or with this individual person. We take shelter in that person who's also taking shelter in us, and it's two fallible soldiers. So this is the reality of the material world, is that there is no security in the material world. The body is very fragile. We may think, yes, I've got plans to live for another 10, 20, 40, 50 years or whatever. But elsewhere, Prabhupada says that death comes and takes away the great plan maker. So whether you're a devotee or a non-devotee, it's not that I'm a devotee now, so I'll be able to live till I'm 70 or 80. No guarantee. Because everybody has their own journey. Everyone has their own karma. We don't know what we did in our past life. If we did, we'd probably be mortified. So it's probably a good thing. But we know it's a mixture of good and bad, which means a mixture of reactions, happiness and distress. And to concoct a way out of this is just very, very risky. It's like if there's a tried and tested method for a particular type of physical ailment, and we think, well, I'll just figure out my own method. Then maybe by chance you'll find something, but why take a chance if everyone else is saying, oh, just take this and everything will be fine. So we see this is what Krishna is saying in this verse, Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha, Man Maya Mamupashrita Bhavo Vinatapasa Paramad Bhavam Agataha. That being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me and thus attained transcendental love for me. So Krishna can manage unlimited amount of living entities surrendering to him. It's not like, okay, I'm overloaded just now, just hold off, don't surrender just yet. Krishna never says that. Immediately he's there. He can reciprocate perfectly with unlimited living entities, whereas we can hardly even reciprocate with one. And sometimes we can hardly even satisfy ourselves. And that's because we've been conditioned into thinking that certain things are good for us and not really knowing what is good for us, what is advantageous and what is detrimental. And that is because we're using the mind. The faculty of the mind is basically to accept and reject. I've made up my mind, I've changed my mind. Like that. And if we use it on the basis of enjoying the senses, then that's not going to have the best benefit for the living entity. But if we use the mind to accept and reject on the basis of what is good for Krishna consciousness, what is good for our spiritual life, what is good for getting out of this material entanglement, then that is the best use of intelligence. So when we're in knowledge, we can make some decisions, like we decide we're going to chant Hare Krishna, we're going to become vegetarian, offer our food, we're going to become a devotee, but then the mind may come back in again because we have some material habits which come by second nature and they feel so familiar to us simply because we're so conditioned. Just like this Stockholm syndrome. Sometimes people are kidnapped and they start to relate to the person who's the kidnapper, to the point where they think this person is feeding me and looking after me, therefore I relate to this person. And even when they're rescued, they still think, where's this person? This person's looked after me. So this is the living entity with Maya. The living entity's got Stockholm syndrome with Maya. We relate to Maya as being the person who is our provider, our protector, our maintainer, the one who supplies everything, all our needs. But we forget that this is not our real situation. And Krishna is the actual provider and the maintainer of all spiritual and material worlds. Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo. So we're struggling with these senses, including the mind. The mind is considered to be the sixth sense. The senses are the highways in and out of the mind. From the mind, we concoct some idea of what is going to be pleasant, what is going to be good for us. And then through the medium of the senses, we try to satisfy those desires. And then we may get some temporary dissatisfaction, but then we have to keep going back for that. And there's usually a price to pay. Either according to our karma, we have to have a certain amount of wealth to facilitate our desires for sense gratification, or we have to get into debt. Sometimes people are trying to raise their standard of living by getting into debt. So getting into debt, how can you ever be happy if you're in debt? There's three things which should be extinguished immediately according to the Vedic understanding. Does anybody remember what they are? That's one. Fire and debt. Yeah, so sometimes we have some disease and we think, oh, just let it see if it passes. And then you go to the doctors and they say, oh, you should have came a year ago. It would have been much better to deal with then. Now you've left it so long, it's going to be hard or it's too late, something like that. Then fire as well. If there's a fire starts, say there's a fire in the kitchen, and then somebody shouts, fire, and we think, we're having class just now, we'll attend to it later. Just hang on, stop freaking out. Then you think, oh, there's some madness going on in there. So we have to, whenever there's a fire, and everybody knows the danger. If one small piece of fire starts, immediately you want to attack it. You want to extinguish it. You don't want to give it a chance to catch and get out of control. So also with debt, it's not, you can't live a happy life having debt because it's always a price to pay. And even if sometimes people they think, oh, I'll just declare bankruptcy, that's okay. Then it's a karmic debt. You still have the karmic debt to pay. You may have to come back and serve someone else that you took that debt from. However, whatever debt we may have to the material world in terms of karma or whatever, actually, I remember there was one individual who wanted to join the temple, but they were a bit of a lad, so to speak, a bit of a naughty lad. And he had got himself a very big fine. It was something like 40,000 euros because he did some naughty activity. And he'd been visiting the temple regularly and he wanted to join. He says, but it's going to take so long to pay off my fine. So he said, we'll go and find out exactly how much it is. And he went and he came back and says, they don't have any record of it. So then he joined. Krishna just cleared that to give him a chance to come. And nobody ever came looking for him for it. So Krishna will do amazing things to clear the pathway for the devotee. If the devotee really wants to surrender, he can work in mysterious ways which we can't. If simply we try to take shelter in Krishna, then he'll help us so much. We might not realize it at the time because we feel we're undergoing some difficulty. But whatever difficulty we go through, physically or mentally, it's only a token reaction for what we would go through if we stayed in the karmic system. Just like sometimes if you're in debt to a company and you're honest and you go and say, I can't pay this debt, they'll say, okay, we'll just pay this amount and that'll be fine. We'll just call it quits. You may have a debt 10 times more and they say, just pay this, we'll write it off. So Krishna writes off our debt, but just to remind us that we're in the material world, so we just don't want to enjoy again. And then once again, forget Krishna and become distracted in the material world, then we have to suffer somewhat to remember this material world is a place of suffering. If we just enjoy too much materially, then For one who's enjoying too much, then they think, I'll come back to Krishna later. There's no big hurry. Just like when I used to work, there was one old guy who used to tell me when he was in the war, Second World War, he says that before going to the trenches, and everybody was, even the big tough guys who were considered atheists, they were praying. And it's natural, Prabhupada mentions that it's natural for the living entity to take shelter in the Supreme Lord when they're in difficulty. And Queen Kunti, she also was praying to Krishna, please continue to give me difficulty, because in these difficult situations I remember you more. Let calamity happen again and again. Now, we shouldn't necessarily pray like that, because it may be too much for us. Just allow Krishna to give what he feels is necessary for us, and just try to take shelter when there is some difficulty there. And difficulty doesn't just mean that we're suffering physically or mentally. Sometimes difficulty means that we have a big enjoying spirit. We want to go enjoy, and we feel, oh, I've just come into something, or I've got a great idea to enjoy, or go and make money, or I could go here and do this and do that. And sometimes this is what happens when we come to Krishna consciousness. Our consciousness starts to become clear, and then we can figure out how to enjoy the material world better. But when you go back out, we'll lose that clarity, and then we forget. And we go back to where we came from. And the problem is that sometimes it's even worse, because now we're in knowledge. Was it said that the only two people who can be happy in the material world is the fool, or someone in ignorance, or the pure devotee. The pure devotee is happy because he's always blissful. He's in his eternal constitutional position. And the fool is happy because they're not aware of the suffering they're causing to themselves for the future, or the suffering that they're causing in their endeavors to enjoy for other living entities. And everyone in between, different degrees of awareness of their own suffering. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions that an intelligent person gives up the sources of misery. So sometimes we give these things up because we realize this is actually not causing me enjoyment. This is actually the opposite. So why do this? I remember when I used to take intoxication, I was thinking, I'm stupid enough. Why do I want to handicap myself even further? So then I just decided I'm giving it all up. And it was quite a big cold turkey from it. But I'd started reading Prabhupada's books, and I could see clearly that these things they haven't been giving me enjoyment. I'm just throwing fuel on the fire. And then you're trying to decide how much fuel you put on the fire so you can enjoy a certain amount. And the thing is, just don't put any fuel on the fire. Just stop it. If you want to give something up, then you have to stop it, not just keep taking a little bit and trying to figure out how little you can take and still enjoy it. So the goal of devotee is param drisva nivartate, to experience a higher taste, and then we can give up the attachment to the things which are a lower taste. And sometimes in that transitional period, because we're feeling some kind of, even sometimes physical or mental withdrawal from our sense objects or our natural comfortable position in life, then there may be some discomfort. But that type of discomfort and even vulnerability, we have to remember it's a good thing. It's a good thing, because we are realizing that without these crutches, then we actually are vulnerable. So what we need is another crutch, but a crutch which never lets you down. These other crutches in the material world, you need a certain amount of money or good looks or some kind of material karma, good karma. If you're poverty stricken and if you get a face like a bag of spanners, or a face like and we could go through quite a few of them, a face like a packet of crisps, then you're not going to be very popular, if you're trying to have some relationships, unless people are really interested in what's inside. And if people are really interested in what's inside, then they should be interested in what's really inside, which is the spirit soul. So we may have some attraction to the material world that's natural because we've been connected with it for so long, and we have some affinity for the material world. We feel like we miss certain things, and that's natural. Just like someone who may be a heroin addict, for example, then if they're trying to get free from that addiction, then they're missing it. They're missing the psychological comfort, they're missing the physical effect, etc. And they may be missing their group of friends, which is engaged in the same thing. But in order to become free from it, they have to pull themselves away from it. And they have to go through a certain amount of discomfort in order to become free from it, and then to never look back and think that there was something in it, and just to remember that the difficulties that it caused. So when we're giving up the material world, just remember why we came this far in the first place, why we started to leave it behind. Don't go back. Don't be a Vantasi sannyasi. Sannyasi is a renunciant, but a Vantasi sannyasi is one who is likened that sometimes you see a dog will throw up and then it'll eat its own vomit, isn't it? Sometimes we see that. So it's throwing up. So similarly, we renounce something which is like throwing it up, but then to go back and take something we renounced out of good sense, then it's not good sense, it's nonsense to go back to it. And this is the struggle we have until we come to the point where we're actually free from all the unwanted things which are within our heart. So that takes a bit of work. It takes a good bit of discipline, and nothing's ever been achieved without discipline. Nothing comes easy. And even sometimes people, there was a friend of ours, a devotee friend who lives in the Blackpool area, and he was telling us that he knew someone down there, someone who was well known to a lot of people, who won the lottery, and he won something like so many £1 million. And he kind of wasted it all, and then he ended up back to where he started. But he was even worse off because nobody really wanted to know him, because he had become a certain type of person just because of having so much money. So even if something just falls into our lap, that's not necessarily that we're going to end up in a better situation if we just squander it. So the life of a devotee is to try to not take shelter in the fallible soldiers of this material world, namely the mind and the senses, society, friendship, love. Material love, then I recall one instance. I met one old man, seemed like a kindly old man, but he was extremely sad because his wife had passed away the year before. And he was he was just crying on his doorstep. You know, it was in his mind the whole time. He's saying it's such a perfect relationship. They never argued. They had so many good times together, perfect combination. So even if you find the perfect combination of material love in this world, then it's going to finish one day. I said, if we could only have her one more year, I says, but if you had her one more year, then you'd be suffering the loss now. So it's or if I could have just went first, but that's, if he could have went first, what's that? That's a selfish thing, isn't it? Because he's thinking that he won't miss her. But as soon as he's passing away, the thing that he's most attached to is his wife. So he's going to be meditating on her. And the thing she's most attached to is her husband. She's going to be meditating on him. So therefore, what happens? Swap roles in the next life, perhaps. Because yum yum vapi smaram bhavam, whatever we think of at the time of death, that's what we will attain. Therefore, we want to cultivate attachment for Krishna. So being detached from the material world, we're not promoting that simply one should just perform self-abnegation, giving up all objects of the senses and just live a very austere, harsh life. No, because then what happens is a couple of things can happen. One is that we can renounce the sense objects, but our mind is always dwelling on them. And what does Krishna call that in the Bhagavad Gita? What? A pretender. Yeah, pretender. So the real renunciation begins not just with giving up the objects. We can detach ourselves from them. We can sell all our record collection, we can sell all our objects, etc. But if we still got the desire, we may just go back out and buy them all again. I know one person who sold his record collection 3 times. He sold it and then bought it all again, sold it, bought it all again. Because he was trying to give it up, but he was so attached and he was dwelling on it. So he was allowing himself to go back into that frame of mind again. So that's our choice. We can allow ourselves to go into that, or we can say, no, I'm going to go further and see what's ahead. It's a great adventure, this spiritual life. We'll come across some amazing realizations we never thought. And it just makes so sense. It just like, wow, that's obvious. Why didn't I see that before? But then 2 minutes later, we forget it again. Have you ever experienced sitting in class and someone says something, you think, wow, that's fine. That makes everything clear now. And then 2 minutes later, you think, what was that again? Because you think, I'll remember that. No problem. That's just clarified that one. So that's why it's important we take notes in class. It helps us stay awake as well if we take notes in class. So I would suggest that devotees can do that, especially if they're having trouble staying awake. But also it helps us to, some of the highlights which are important to us, which will help us in our understanding, our practice, and our sharing of Krishna consciousness. We write these things down and we look at them from time to time. We don't have to write it all down verbatim, and then, the paper's going on fire because you're trying to catch every word, but we just make a few notes. This is really good. I still have the notes from 1983 when I joined. I see them from time to time. It's interesting to see how some of those devotees who were giving class then are still around now giving class. And so repetition is the mother of learning. And being in that vulnerable situation where we've given up things, like Arjuna asked Krishna, if I don't succeed in spiritual life and I've given up my material life, then I'll be like, will I perish like a riven cloud? Sometimes you see a big cloud and it's a little bit separate from it and then it just kind of vanishes. It has no connection to anything. So this is a very important question. Arjuna's asking all the right questions so that we basically all our doubts can be eradicated. And therefore then we think, actually, yeah, let me just go ahead and take shelter in Krishna. He won't let me down. And what does Krishna say in response to that? And a little advancement on this path protects one from the most dangerous type of fear. Neha bikramo nasosti pratavayana vidyate. So one who tries to make some endeavor in Krishna consciousness, even if somehow or another they don't complete it, then suchinam srimatam gehe yoga brashta bijayate. The suchi, one will take birth in either a suchi or a Brahmin or devotee family, or Srimatam. Sri means the goddess of fortune, like Sri Vishnu. That is Vishnu and Lakshmi Devi together. So we're talking about the goddess of fortune. One will then be born in a situation where they're not materially in a distressful situation. If one is too poverty-stricken, then they're too concerned or too much in a suffering condition. They're too concerned with the suffering to be able to take to Krishna consciousness. So whatever happens, Krishna is saying here that we will take up from where we left off. There's no loss or diminution. And a little advancement in this path protects one from the most dangerous type of fear. And the most dangerous type of fear is what? Do you have it? Yeah, that's right. Going back into the animal species, into that cycle of birth and death, going through so many different species, then gradually, after many lifetimes, coming back to the human form of life, and then once again having that choice. So the fact we've came this far means that we're never going to be satisfied until we go further. And therefore, let's just complete it. Let's just do it in this life and be done with this material world. And this is what Prabhupada is telling us. We can be done with it in this lifetime. We don't have to come back. It doesn't matter where we've been, it's where we're going. That's what matters. And it doesn't matter how long we've been in the material world. We've all been in the material world for many, many births. So we all have a lot of conditioning behind us. But Krishna, he will help us. Prabhupada says that if you take one step toward Krishna, he'll take 10 towards you. And sometimes we don't realize that until we look back and realize, well, I could have never done that on my own. I'd have given up, or I'd have cracked up or crumbled under it. So certainly there'll be some challenges, but there's challenges in material life as well. So better that we undergo whatever we have to go in Krishna's service, and at the end of it, go back to Godhead, than just do it in the material world, and at the end of it, have to go through it again. And with regards to friendship and society love, then Prabhupada says here, no one is able to help you at the time of death. No one's able to help you but Krishna, the Supreme Lord. Therefore, our only concern is how to satisfy Krishna. And Krishna says how to do that. That simply we approach a bona fide representative of Krishna who will engage us in devotional service and who will guide us so that we can become a devotee of Krishna. And we're talking about anartha nivritti. The problem is the anarthas are unwanted things. Often they're not unwanted. We still haven't come to that point. When we realize they're unwanted, then giving them up will be a bit quicker. But we still want them. That's why it takes so long, because we're hanging on to it in some form or of another. Some very subtle form. We're maybe not going to the pub and taking 10 pints of beer and smoking this and doing that. But in some way or another, perhaps we allow our mind to be intoxicated in some other way by a little bit of pride, like, oh, I know so many slokas or whatever. So this pride is also a form of intoxication. Or someone thinks that we're a good kirtan singer and we get, a little bit distracted by some glorifications that people may give. So we have to adjust that ourselves by reminding ourselves where we came from and where we would be had it not been for the mercy of Guru, Krishna and the Vaishnavas, the holy name. And not that we smash our self-esteem, but just to keep it level, enough to keep things level, so that we don't become affected by pride. And when we understand that there is no shelter in society, friendship or love, you can temporarily identify with a certain town or a country or a street or a group of friends or a club. You might join a bikers club or a tiddlywinks club or whatever you want to join, and you feel some kind of sharing of interest there. But it's just a major distraction, really. That's all it is. A major distraction from what is a real necessity of life. So the best club is the devotee club. And share our realizations and experiences. In this way, we all help each other go forward in devotional service. Okay, I'll just stop there. Does anyone get any comments or questions? Adokstu.
It says it enjoys distress, which is interesting because generally you suffer distress and you enjoy happiness, but here it's not. There's no distinction made between happiness and distress. They're both situations that are. And I just thought it's kind of interesting foreseeing the nature of sense gratification in Kali Yuga is that people are doing things to themselves and others now in the name of enjoyment, and you can see they're actually just distress. They're just distressful, So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing I just noticed was enjoys alone, and that's kind of sad that material world, even though we try to connect, we can't really connect with anybody because nobody really knows who they are. So everyone is on their own, even if you fill your house with loads of people who keep patting you on the back, you're still alone. It's just the illusion that you have relationships with people.
Srila Prabhupada said, thanks for bringing those points up. Srila Prabhupada said that each and every living entity experiences the suffering enjoyment of their own mind and senses, but they're not aware of anyone else's suffering. So this talk about merging, actually, there is no merging. We remain individual eternals. And therefore he calls it the last snare of Maya, that we think we've merged. But because the living entity is active, living entity is, what was the word he uses? I can't remember, but a living entity requires activity, then they come back down to the material platform, perform altruistic activities, philanthropic activities, etc. So we experience, and when it's time for us, in the words of Jimi Hendrix, he says, I'm the one that's going to have to die when it's time for me to die, so let me live my life the way I want to. Now that's his choice, of course, but the first half, I'm the one that has to die when it's time for me to die. So nobody else can help you at that point except for a devotee. If you're dying and somehow or another you're bewildered, the devotee comes up and chants to you, then that's such a fortunate passing. Having a devotee present, having kirtan present at the time of death is a real blessing, because kirtan is the safest place in the universe. But the very word Maya means that which is not, that Prabhupada explains it. We take our suffering to be enjoyment. So we think we're suffering, we think we're enjoying, but we're actually suffering. And sometimes people compare their suffering as well. It's like, oh, I had COVID. Oh yeah, I had COVID. What was it like for you? Oh, I just had like a runny nose and a sore throat. Oh, that was nothing. I had lost my sense of taste, and I had a high fever. And oh, that was nothing. So maybe not so much with COVID, but certainly with other things. We compare our scars, our war wounds. How many times have you broken? Many breakages have you had? I broke my wrist, my foot, my arm, my leg. Oh, that was nothing. I fell out of a plane and I broke every bone in my body. So there's this competition to see who suffered the most. In fact, sometimes people say that the only people who have got anything to say are the ones who have suffered the most. So then that's not necessarily from a platform of knowledge, because an intelligent person doesn't like to suffer. And nobody likes to suffer, but an intelligent person figures out what are the causes of suffering and avoid it. If you know that swimming in this part of the sea, there's a good chance you're going to get munched by a shark, then an intelligent person wouldn't go in the water. It would be foolish to go in, wouldn't it? Or if there's a river and there's crocodiles in there, you think, well, I'm not going to go bathing in that river. That's just far too risky. But a fool might think, I'll be okay. And maybe they will, but if they keep on doing it, one day they won't be okay. But this is the nature of material enjoyment. Actually, Prabhupada says, happiness, distress, it's all distress. And the happiness we experience is simply just a very little relief from the distress which we're under. This Bhajan Radha Krishna Bol Bol Bolori Subai, Shikadiya Shabnadiya Pirchinechi Gornitai. So in the purport, Prabhupada explains that if someone is putting your head underwater, and then for a moment they bring it up, and you gasp for air, and then you put your head underwater again, then when you're gasping for air, that's not happiness. That's just temporary relief. He says this is material pleasure, that mostly we're suffering, and then we get a little snippet of pleasure, and then that keeps us going. Because we're pleasure-seeking entities, and we think that's all there is, but there isn't. That isn't all there is. There's more than that. There's an anandam vidivardhanam, an ever-increasing ocean of transcendental bliss awaiting for us if we just get free from our attachment to material life. And we can experience little snippets of that just by sticking with the process of devotional service. Sometimes we have some blissful feast or kirtan or illuminating words or we get some amazing darshan or something. So we just encourage the devotees to continue with their process of Krishna consciousness and never give up to going back to where they came from. We've already come to that point where I need to leave this stuff behind. So just keep it left behind, keep going forward. And ultimately, there'll be no regrets. Yes.
I was just going to resonate on that point that you made about taking notes during class. One good thing about taking notes during class is you may be trying to assimilate the information. Is it? Yeah. And if you write down the question that you're trying to understand, because later on at the end of the class you may find you had a few questions but you've forgotten them. So, and generally, a symptom of the hearing process is that there should be questions because you're trying to figure out how you're going to implement that. And then just on that, this last book that Shiva Rama has just done, Sankalpa, it's very much Sankalpa Kamudi. It's very much because there's a kind of a cliche that you just have to, just give this lifetime and then everything will be okay. Follow the regs and do your service and you'll be fine. But that automatic advancement is only there if you have a very, very clear idea of where you are right now and you understand what the next step is and you intentionally take the next, what the next step is and you intentionally take the next step. If you don't and you're just kind of bumbling along, hoping for the best, then it's a misunderstanding of the word automatic.
Prabhupada says that memory in Kali Yuga means pen and paper. I personally find that if I don't write things down, then there's a very good chance I won't remember it. Especially if you have a lot of things, and it's not even the unimportant things that we forget. Sometimes very important things we might forget. So it's good practice. You can remember by repetition. Repetition means we're hearing it, we're writing it, we're reading it again. And it's things which are pertaining to us individually. Okay, we'll just stop there. Iskon Guruvinda Ki, Shri Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaur Premanand.